Hi everyone, this is Roger Capello from the Wachusett Chess Club, bringing you My Week at the Club, episode number 37, I believe. And this week I played Ken Gurge in a interesting game involving a kingside attack. And before I get to that, I wanted to apologize for missing out on a few weeks here. I've been goofing off a bit too much, enjoying the summer. Last week I had lost a game against Brett Kildall, which I had intended to annotate, but it was a difficult game, and it turned out that Brett actually did a very nice job of annotating it in his YouTube channel. So if you look up Brett Kildall, you can find that game and see what happened. But before I get into this week's game with Ken, which happened in the last round, I'd like to kind of give you my astronomy tidbit of the week. As you can see over there on the right hand side of the picture, there's a funny artist conception of a couple of asteroid-like objects stuck together close to one another, and this is supposed to be a depiction of an object called 2014 MU69, which is a Kuiper Belt object. It's about 40 AU from the Sun, out a little bit beyond the orbit of Pluto. And it's going to be visited by the New Horizons spacecraft at the end of next year. And it was sort of interesting how this was discovered. They wanted a target for the New Horizons spacecraft, so they used the Hubble Space Telescope to look for any objects that were in that direction that wouldn't take too much of a mid-course correction to get to. And they were able to find this, a very faint object, 27th magnitude, which is really right at the limits of one can do. And so they discovered it and decided to go to it, but in order to find out more about it, they've been studying it, trying to pin down its orbit, and also they want to know something about its characteristics ahead of time to help plan the observations. And so they've calculated that there were some occultations that will take place of the object in front of, passing in front of a star and dimming or completely blocking out the star's light for a short period of time and then going on. And these occultations, they're difficult to figure out exactly because you don't know the orbit precisely of the object that you're looking at. And so you don't know where the shadow that the object will cast from the star, the star's illuminating this object, and it's casting a shadow on the Earth that sweeps across the Earth. And the trick is to be right where that shadow crosses across. It's sort of like an eclipse of the star. And they're very small. You have to be just in the right place. And so they've had a couple of unsuccessful tries, but just last month in July 17th, I believe, they managed to detect a passage in front of a star by observing down in Argentina. So they took a bunch of small telescopes down there with timing systems on them and looked. You don't need a big telescope for this sort of observation because what you're looking at is the light from the star, not from this Kuiper Belt object. And the star is quite a bit brighter. It's still a dim star, but a lot brighter than the Kuiper Belt object. So with a number of small telescopes scattered around in Argentina, some of them actually detected this shadow crossing across them. And what's interesting about it is that it looks like it's either very irregular shaped, like it has a big bite taken out of it and it's long and thin, or it looks like what the artist depicted over here, a double close binary. Either close binary or contact binary, they call it, where the two objects are actually touching one another as they orbit around. And typical size that they're seeing is sort of 10 or 20 kilometers, that either the overall single body is, or the two individual components have a total size of 10 to 20 or maybe 30 kilometers, depending on which of the geometries you have. So it'll be neat to see what it looks like when New Horizons goes past it, and that's going to be right at the very end of 2018 or the beginning of 2019. So we have that to anticipate. So on to the chess. Yeah, so this game, as most of mine have been recently, opened at d4. And let's get the focus over here. So Ken replied d5. I played c4, and he went into a some sort of Slav defense with c6. I played knight f3, knight f6. This is all standard. And knight c3. And now, because he played e6, this is a semi-Slav, not a normal Slav. He didn't capture the pawn on c4 immediately. And instead, he's adopting this very strong pawn triangle, even at the price, though, of course, locking the bishop in behind it. I played e3. He developed his knight to d7, his queen knight to d7. And I played bishop to d2. So bishop to d2 is a little unusual. We've been following pretty much the main line of the semi-Slav so far. And normally what happens here is, back in this position, before the bishop goes to d2, was that white would play bishop to d3. And the reason I didn't play this is I just didn't want to spend a tempo going to d3 when he can just take on c4 and I would have to take back with my bishop, and basically wasting tempo. Now, I guess the counter argument could be made, and probably would be made, that it's not really clear at this point that where the bishop belongs, where the dark squared bishop belongs. Maybe it's going to end up on d2. Maybe it's best placed on b2, or maybe after this e-pawn moves, it's instead going to be immediately developed out to f4 or g5. So I'm not too surprised that it's a fairly rare bird in master practice. It's only a couple % of the time that this bishop to d2 move is made. It's not bad, but it's probably not optimal. So Ken continued with bishop to e7, and then I exchanged on d5. And my thinking here, back up a step, my thinking is that typically there are a couple of issues with development here in Slav, and one is that this black bishop that's on the light squares, that's on c8, is now inside of the pawn triangle here, and might have a little trouble developing. Might have to come out through b7 or a6. And so that's one reason normally not to release the, to allow CB, EB, and to open up the diagonal for that bishop. The other thing, though, is that this knight that's on d7 has now developed through d7. If I had exchanged earlier, then the knight could come to a more active square here on c6. And so the fact that the knight has already committed itself to d7, and the fact that it's going to block the bishop on c8 made me feel like that I'm not giving black too much compensation here by opening up that diagonal, letting him move the e-pawn. And the upside of doing this is that I'm trading a c-pawn, which is a fairly, is a less important pawn than an e-pawn if he took back with his e-pawn. And if he takes back with this c-pawn, then that's even less of an advantage for him, because now he, unless he plays a knight back to b8, he can't really use this c6 square, and it really hasn't helped the development of his bishop at all. So that was my thinking, but he surprised me and took back with the knight. That's, looking at the opening databases, that's a less optimal move. Usually the pawn would recapture in that position. Because the problem is I can just play e4, and now this is looking quite a bit like a Grunfeld. He takes on c3, and I actually took back with the pawn, and in a couple of moves here, I'll just skip ahead, he's going to play c5, and this looks a lot like a Grunfeld sort of position where black is trying to open up put pressure on white's d4 square. And of course, the big difference, and it's a very fundamental difference, is that the bishop in this case is on, well, let's get a different color. How about red? So the bishop is on e7 instead of in the Grunfeld, where it's normally on g7 after the fianchetto. And that's important because from g7 it would be exerting influence on the center. So quickly spin back a couple of moves here. To this point, after he took on c3, without thinking really, I took toward the center, figuring that I wanted this strong pawn center. Looking at the databases, this position was arrived at 3 times in master play, and all 3 times a master played bishop takes on c3. And, you know, that had briefly crossed my mind. Okay, why is it not letting me do this? Let's see, he takes, it doesn't want to let me do that. Oh, because it's, okay, it's drawing arrows instead. So, if I took back with the bishop, okay, is it not going to let me make a move? I guess not. If you can imagine it. If the bishop were on c3, it would be supporting the center. It would be exerting influence over on black's king side. The only disadvantage, of course, is that I have a b pawn instead of a c pawn supporting the center. So I can see advantages both ways, but apparently my evaluation function is different than that of very strong players. I took back with a c pawn, nevertheless, and he castled, as you saw, and I developed my bishop to d3 because that's where it's going to put the most influence on h7 here, eyeing it from a distance. Ken started immediately chipping away at my center with c5, and I castled because there's no immediate threat. He supported his pawn in case I, well, actually not. That's really not the issue. I'm not really threatening to take on c5 at any time because he has it adequately defended with pieces, and it would just shatter my pawn structure. But what he wants to do is to develop this bishop that's sitting here out of play on, well, let's try yellow this time, on c8. And he'll do that by coming through the diagonal from a6 to c8. So he opens up that, gets ready to fianchetto. And I play rook e1 to not only to support my center in advance of him attacking this e4 square, but also with an idea to, at some point, advance these center pawns and possibly have this rook available to swing over onto the king side. It's already looking like there might be some attacking possibilities for white. Okay, he played his rook to e8, neutralizing mine somewhat. And I completed, well, just about completed my development here by getting my queen off the back rank and connecting my 2 rooks. And also now eyeing up this, this diagonal going toward h7 at some point with the bishop and queen battery, maybe attacking this pawn after my e-pawn moves. Okay, Ken continued on with bishop to b7. Now, back in this position when I played queen c2, I was sort of inviting this variation that we went into, and it turns out it wasn't. I shouldn't have. It wasn't the best thing for me, because what happens after he plays bishop to b7? My idea was to go ahead and play e5. And I thought I was being clever with this. Now, e5 is, a strong move for attacking the king side. It really restricts black's possible defenses. Cuts down the mobility of the f-pawn. It keeps the knight from coming into this f6 square for defense. And it opens up lines for my pieces to come over and attack his king side. And sort of the obvious rejoinder would have been, He didn't do it, but would have been to play bishop takes f3. But I thought he couldn't do that because I figured I would use a Zwischenzug here, bishop takes h7 check. The king would have to move, and then I would take his bishop back on f3. And true, I've damaged my pawn structure a bit, but it's really not a horrible amount of damage in this situation, I figured. This f-pawn will shortly support the center after it moves up to f4 at some point. And my king will probably, I was thinking would play to h1 and my rook would come over and play along the g-file and could aid my attack. But what I didn't realize was that he had a good response. I mean, I looked at this when several moves ago when I analyzed it. I thought of the move g6 and I discarded it because I figured I would happily, my bishop is trapped, but I figured I would happily trade it for a couple more pawns. Bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. And that's where I stopped evaluating in my mind back, on move 13 or so when I was looking at allowing this whole, when I played, was considering e5. And the problem is, of course, is that if I'd gone just one move further in my analysis, there's a very obvious pin on the g-file, and that's going to win my queen. So that would not have been good. And fortunately for me, Ken chose not to go down that line, even though it probably would have been his best line of play. Instead, he played a more defensive-minded move, knight f8. Following the old maxim of it's hard to get checkmated on the king side when you have a knight on f8. And it is a strong defensive piece, looking after this weak h7 square. So I played bishop to e4 in this position. The idea here was I was just using this as a way to get my queen back over onto the king side, and also because I had to do something about my knight. Rook to e3, defending it this way, looks ugly because this bishop, I can't do it now, but at some point could skewer my rook and attack through it and trade off bishops anyhow, dark squared bishops, which I wanted to keep. I didn't really like the idea of trading my bishop, but I figured that it might be worth it in order to feed my pieces over onto the king side. And he went ahead and exchanged and took back with a queen, and now my queen has more access to the king side. He played his knight up to be a little more aggressively posted, but still be in help on the defense of the king side. And I totally completed my development by playing the other rook to the d-file, thinking that maybe at some point I would either have some action along the d-file or that rook could also join in the attack by coming through d3 and somewhere over to the king side. Okay, but Ken's response to that was just to play his queen to d5 and offering the trade of queens. And the trade of queens, would have been okay. It would have led to an equal game. So if I took the queen and he takes back, and if I played a4 to restrain his queenside pawns, that's a chess game. It's okay for both of us. Looking at it now, it really doesn't look too bad. I wouldn't mind playing this as white. But the move that I really thought most about, instead of the one that I made, was queen to g4, because I wanted to keep my queen over in the attack. And I felt that there was no easy way for black to attack my queen. He doesn't have a white squared bishop anymore. The knight can't maneuver to a square that's attacking it very easily. I was a little worried about vague ideas at some point with this pawn causing a problem, although right now I could take it en passant. The h-pawn's not going to attack it. But long story short, I felt that my queen didn't have a lot of maneuvering room over there and that it would be hard to generate an attack. Although, maybe with h4 and h5 here at some point I could actually have generated a little bit of play. Let's see, the line that the computer was looking at was h4. He brings his queen back in contact with his king side. h5, the knight goes back to f8. I could come up and trade the bishops off, but he doesn't have to trade the bishops. Instead, he could just bring his queen up and threaten to trade queens, and my queen gets out of the way, and it said it's equal. And I believe it. I mean, I would rather play the white side of this position just because white has the initiative here, but black has enough material over it in defensive posts that black could defend what's going on here. So that did not happen. Instead, I played the queen back to b1. So, you know, from e4 back to b1. And on b1, I'm defending this pawn, so there's no question of me gambiting it. And so I'm not really taking any risk, it seemed like. It just was a slower way of playing. But I could also, one could argue that white's really not getting much of an advantage in this game at all either. Okay, Ken played knight to h4, which is an interesting move because if my knight were to move carelessly, like to g5 or something like that, then I would find myself checkmated on g2 by the queen. So that would not be good. Also, he's threatening to trade the knights, injuring my pawn structure again. So I went ahead and traded knights, and that invites his bishop over onto my king side, but I didn't really see that there were any really dangerous threats coming in there. And so I just continued to develop my pieces here, getting my bishop off of, well, actually there was there's a threat here of black winning the d pawn. I have to do something about that. And well, do I have to do something? Takes, queen takes. Yeah, I do. Okay, I was just thinking that maybe with a discovered attack, I could. That's not such a problem. But well, let's say white did something like. Okay, I guess I'm in arrow drawing mode again. So, you know, if I did something like a2 to a4, then he could go after this pawn and take it, and then I don't have any great discovery here. I could attack his bishop, but it's defended laterally by his queen. And so he could come over here, say, attacking my bishop and at the same time keeping his bishop under control. Let me make sure that this is not a problem. Nope, it's showing a close to a pawn advantage for black. So that wouldn't have been a good thing to do. And so I went ahead and defended that pawn. So after I defended it, okay, he played c4. Now that changed things a bit because that, you know, opened up, it got rid of the threat. Oh, I should have pointed out that at this point I'm also threatening to, bishop to e3 is not purely defensive, it's threatening to take the pawn on c5. Because if he takes my e pawn, I could then take on b6 and there would be a problem because of potential discovered attack with my bishop. So that's why he pushed his pawn by. I think maybe just defending that pawn might have been a little more flexible response. And now that the pawn structure in the center is frozen and I want to get more control over this d4 square, I want to move my bishop, and it seemed like maybe the best square to go to was c1. Okay, anyhow, I retreated it back, and also with the idea. I'm remembering here of my ideas during the game. Also with the idea of playing the bishop to a3 and getting active along this this diagonal over here on the queen side. So that looked like it might be an interesting concept. And so Ken decided to put a stop to that immediately by playing his bishop back to e7. Okay, that allows my rook now to come up and immediately position over onto the king side. The other thing with his bishop on h4, it would have been it was undefended. So back here, that bishop is a potential target, and so after my rook comes up and over to h3, I would have gained the tempo by doing that. That's another reason for him to prophylactically to move that bishop in advance of my rook maneuver. I'm not sure if he was thinking that, but I remember it crossing my mind. So after I played my rook up, he put his rook on a more active file there, the half-open D file, and you know, there's starting to be a threat. So you know, in fact, in fact, it almost works for him. It doesn't quite, but there's pressure along the D file here, and so if he's not careful, or if I'm not careful rather, I could find myself checkmated on the back rank. So if I did something, well, let's see. It's black's move. If he took this pawn, which is, in fact, not a very good move, because it would allow me to come in. Well, I shouldn't. I'll just show you the variation. I could come in, check. He could play over, and then that would be checkmate. Instead, so could get back here. All right, get this variation going right here. Sorry. Okay, no, not h6. Okay, if at this point he played queen takes e5, that's what we're looking at. It turns out that it would be a very bad mistake for me to take the queen and allow checkmate on d1, but it would be a very good move for me to go ahead and take on h7 and lead to a mate. So that's why he really, you know, he's not immediately threatening in this position to take on e5, so I don't have to worry about it. But at some point that could be a serious threat to take on e5 and make use of the fact that my d pawn is pinned. So right now I have this potential mate threat on h7. There's really only one nice way to meet it, as I was showing in this variation that we momentarily stepped into. If he played, by mistake, if he played h6, my plan was just to go ahead and sack the bishop. He either has to take the pawn back or lose it. If he takes it back and I take back with the rook, now I'm threatening to checkmate him. He has to play f5 to stop that, and I can just play take on passant, and there's really no good answer to this. But you know, for example, if he takes it back with the bishop here, I can check with the queen. King can go to h8. Well, it has to go to h8. I take with the rook check. He moves, and then it's checkmate. So that would have been a fun and quick end to the game. But of course, he saw all that and played what I expected him to play, which was g6. And that shuts me down on the white diagonal, the light square diagonal. I don't have any minor pieces that I can even sacrifice on those squares. But the price that he's paying for it is it weakens him on the dark squares. And so I immediately played bishop to h6. That's the move the computer likes too. And it has several good characteristics about it, as I showed in my notes there. It's controlling this f8 square, or at least keeping a rook out of it. It keeps the king from running away over to the queen side, and also puts into action my plan of bringing my queen over to the king side now on the dark squares. So after I did that, he played his pawn to f5. So this was kind of a crucial point in the game where I have some long-term threats. Now the computer is not too worried at this point. It sees other ways of defending the position, and let's see. Let me look, and I remember it said go ahead and play a5. You know, just grab space on the queen side, because it didn't see any lines that were deadly to it. And I think that's true. There's nothing that's too deadly, but you know, for a human player, it's kind of a worrisome thing. And I was already starting to look at some interesting tactics coming along on the king side. So let's follow the computer line. If he played a5, what I was looking at was something like queen c1, with the idea of thinking about playing bishop to g7. And so if he played rook to d7, defending along the his second rank there, what I was going to do is play bishop to g7, and it's a sacrifice that he can't accept. It turns out he doesn't have to accept it, and that's why the computer was happy. But the line that I was looking at in my head was, what happens if he takes? Well, I just come in check. He is forced to play the king, well, to g8 or h8. h8's even worse than g8. I check again, and then there's mate. So there was a forced mate in 3. But of course, what he could do, instead of taking it with the king, would have been to capture it with to play the bishop to f8 and to exert some control over that square. But this position actually would have, I think, looks very nice for white. And when I let the computer run a long time on this, it then started seeing that, yeah, there really were some possibilities. So as you notice, it starts out saying, this is an equal position. But in the long term, the white has, you know, quite a bit of mobility on the king side there. And I see it jumped up to 1.7 because it got out to 20 ply deep now, and it's starting to discover that, yeah, there really are some possibilities, and it starts to climb higher. So this is a position that, you know, is really not that happy for black, and especially not that happy of a position if you're a human trying to play it. That, you know, it's up to 2.5 out at 23 ply, and it would continue to climb. I think this is perhaps a winning position for white at this point. But you know, it takes a whole lot of accuracy to beat a computer in this position. I wouldn't want to try to win from the outset. Anyhow, that's not what happened. So back here, after I played bishop to h6, he played f5, which opens up does a couple things. It opens up his king side potentially for me to attack. It also opens up lines, his second rank for lateral defense here. So that's a good thing. It also gives him more squares for his king and other pieces to move in. So it gives him more space on the king side to run with. The computer doesn't like this move too well, but I wasn't that happy to see it. I looked at the response of taking en passant, but the problem with taking en passant at this point, e takes f6, bishop takes f6, is what I said, is that he has, he can defend the squares over here, over on the king side, and I was just afraid that his king would be able to escape. In particular, now he has this nice f7 square for the king to go through, and also for the rook to defend through. But, you know, it's not that easy. After rook e1, I'm putting a lot of pressure on squares. This pawn on e5 is quite weak, and I think in the long term this would be a nice position for white to play. But he didn't do that. So instead, or rather, I didn't do that. I didn't play trade pawns on, didn't take the pawn on f6. Instead, I played rook to e1 with the idea of, well, a couple of ideas. One is putting my rook where I can swing that rook over to the king side, like, you know, so at some point. Also keeping his queen out of e4. I didn't want to have him come in there and offer the trade, even though immediately it might not be good, but at some point in the near future, he might be able to make that move. The other thing is that I did want to move my queen, and if my rook on d1 is a bit of a target for this tactic we talked about a little while ago. The queen and rook attacking along the, I got an itchy nose today, attacking along the d-file and, you know, having possible tactics involving queen takes on e5, and this pawn ends up being pinned because this rook down here is going to get captured. It's not going to happen right now, but that's, if my queen were to move away, that would be a threat. So, for all those reasons, I moved off of the d-file to e1. Should move this along. He centralized his rook. Looks like a very reasonable move. I played my queen to c1 with the idea of maybe following up with queen to g7 and coming in with the queen check on h6, that sort of tactic. Okay, he played his rook to c7 though, and now he's got too much defensive control along the 7th rank for that to be a good idea. If I take it, and he can just move to the 8th rank. So I came back and offered the trade of bishops, also thinking about playing my bishop into f6, but he controlled that square now that I've yielded my control of the h8 square, f8 square. I moved my queen over to the king side. He moved his rook, his other rook, to the 7th rank. So now he's really defending along the 7th rank. And I decided that I would no longer offer the bishop trade, but instead try to restrict the mobility of his rook, now that he's sort of stuck on that f7 square. Okay, he played rook to d7. I think the idea here is just to exert some control over the d5 square so that his queen can move away and no longer be a blockader of my d pawn, because then the rook is controlling this square. Something on that order. Okay, I played, at this point, I had to try to figure out how to pursue my attack, so I played my rook over to g3, pinning the g pawn. And the computer says this is dead equal. Now, I actually like white here because there's this attacking idea of moving the h pawn up, but black has adequate defenses. He played his queen out to a5, which the computer didn't like. As I recall in this position, the queen just, or rather the computer just said go ahead and push the b pawn and start to expand on the queen side and get some counterplay over there without removing the queen from its centralized post. Instead, he played queen to a5, which was a little more worrisome for me because now he's attacking this a pawn and also putting pressure on the c pawn if my rook were to move away. I ignored his attack on the a pawn. I figured my activity on the king side was more crucial at this point, and that if he took the pawn, I would end up winning his g pawn in return. And he chose to bring his bishop back. And this actually was the first point in the game where things really took a turn for white. If you look at the evaluation, I think it's over 2 pawns to white's advantage now. And the reason is because he just couldn't afford to leave the king on the G file, because I can just my attack is just a little too fast here at attacking the pawn on G6, and he can't move his rook to where it defends it because my bishop and pawn have both of those squares under control. Just a second, I have a phone call. Okay, wrong number. So H5 has just been played, and I'm attacking this pawn here twice, and it's hard for the rook can't get anywhere to defend it, and if he trades off the bishops, which is what he did, that just invites my queen to the party, and now I have 3 attacks, and he can put a second defense on it, but of course 3 is bigger than 2. He does do that though, and the computer thinks that's the best move, but it's still not a great option. I take, and he took back with his H-pawn. The computer, since he's losing a pawn anyhow, the computer actually liked getting the king off of the G file where the rook is, but it wasn't a huge difference in evaluation. And so at this point, I can just go ahead and win that pawn, and now I've managed to open up the pawn structure that's in front of his king, and the attack has gotten into quite a dangerous stage. He went ahead and took my c-pawn anyhow, and of course now he's threatening to take my rook with check, which looks pretty scary, but the problem is that white has, white is faster in this position, because I take check. If he doesn't take back, it'll be a checkmate next move. So he has to take back, but that allows me then to take on e6 with check. He can move his king to f8, which is what the computer would like to see, or another square. He moved it to f7. Of course, it's pinned on that square. And now the crucial thing that I saw when I went into this small combination was that when I went into the combination that allowed him to take on c3, that I have this move rook e3, which attacks the queen, gains a vital tempo, and brings my rook into the attack. Now, it's true, he can check me with his queen, but I have a very safe square to go to on h2, because h4, among other things, made luft for my king. And now, what's he going to do? His queen is locked out of the action, and I have my queen and rook attacking his king in the open region here with only his rook to defend. And although when I went into this, I couldn't analyze it out to checkmate, I had figured that there had to be either checkmate or a win of his rook or something in this position. And that's true. Ken tried to prevent that with f4, but the problem is now I don't need to check with my rook on g3. I can just bring it to h3, and I'm threatening to come in eventually on h8 after I check with the queen. And so he played the king immediately to f8. That that speeds up the mate for me, because then I was able to just check him on h8 as a mate in 3. He only has one move, and then I mate with the queen on h6. So mate in 2 after he went to f8. So it was interesting for me, because it was the game, because I had to work hard at figuring out some way to open up his king side, particularly after let's see, somewhere in here, say, after the knights got traded, in this position, it wasn't clear to me how I was going to open up his control over the white squares, because I didn't have a white squared bishop or any knights. I only had pawns and the major pieces. And earlier, not later, in this position, it looked like he was defending pretty well, although I still had quite a bit of material to keep attacking with. He had pretty good control over the dark squares, which made approaching his kingside difficult. So it was a difficult game for me to figure out how to attack, but then again, I was the one that was attacking, so that made it more fun for me, I suspect, than it was for Ken. So that was it. We've already run pretty long here. Glad you stuck around till the end of the game. If you did that, thanks. And I'll hopefully be back next week with my game of the week. Be the start of a new tournament. This was the round 5 game of the last tournament. I ended up with 3.5 out of 5 points because I had a draw and then that loss against Brett Kildall. So it wasn't a great tournament for me, but hopefully this next one will be a little bit better. So long, and talk to you next week.